Hello everyone and welcome to this video on understanding intervals. Let's get started. Firstly, we need to understand what an interval is. Intervals are simply the relationship that two notes have with each other. For us to know what intervals are, we need to know the distance between the notes, which will allow us to see what type of interval it will be. If I have notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C, I will have my C major scale. Each note in that C major scale is a certain distance away from the tonic or starting position of the scale. This is what intervals describe. Let's look at how this works. In our major scale, we have four different types of intervals: major, perfect, octave, and unison. From C to D, we get an interval called a major second. The reason why we call this a major second is because when we play the major scale ascending, there are two notes played between C and D, which are C and D. So it's only fair that we call it a major second. From C to E, the interval is a major third. We use the same concept as before to find out what the interval is. We count how many notes that are played in the major scale between C and E, which is 3 notes, meaning the interval is a major third. From C to F, we get a perfect fourth. Now, this may seem strange as it would make sense to call it a major fourth, but we'll look into this later on. From C to G, we get a perfect fifth. From C to A, we get a major sixth. From C to B, we get a major seventh. And from C to C, we get an octave or a perfect eighth. We also have unison, which is the distance between the tonic note and the tonic. And since it's the same note, we call this unison. So you may be thinking, okay, cool, I kind of get this now. I basically count how many notes there are in between a note and another note in the scale to get my interval. Easy. This would be correct, but we can also measure the distances between the two notes in half steps. So, from C to D, I have my major second, as we mentioned before. But if we have a look at this in terms of half steps, C to D is 2 half steps away. C to D flat to D. 2 half steps. C to E is a major third, which is 4 half steps away. C to F is a perfect fourth, which is 5 half steps away. C to G is a perfect fifth, which is 7 half steps away. C to A is a major sixth, which is 9 half steps away. C to B is a major seventh, which is 11 half steps away. And C to C is an octave, which is 12 half steps away. Now that we understand these two systems that help us find the interval of two notes, we can move on to understanding the more complex types of intervals. There are another 3 types of intervals that we need to learn: minor, augmented, and diminished. Let's start with the minor. A minor interval is essentially a major interval but half a step down. For example, if I have C to E, I have a major third, which is 4 half steps away from C. To make this a minor interval, I simply take my E note and flatten it by a half step, making it E flat, which will mean that it is now 3 half steps away from the tonic. This interval is called a minor third. This means that we can take any major interval and make it a minor. Okay, remember how it was strange that perfect intervals were called perfect? Well, there's a very good reason as to why they're called that. Let's look at a perfect fifth as an example. If I want to decrease the perfect fifth by a half step, it does not become a minor fifth, but instead it becomes what we call a diminished fifth. It is the same if I want to increase the perfect fifth by a half step. I then get an augmented fifth. This is the same for the perfect fourth and the octave. This means that if I had C to G, which is a fifth, and I wanted to make a diminished interval, I could flatten the G, making the total distance between C and G flat 6 semitones, or 6 half steps. The same goes if I want an augmented fifth. I would sharpen the G to G sharp, and there would be a total of 8 semitones, or 8 half steps, from C to G sharp, making it an augmented fifth. Diminished and augmented can also occur in various situations for both major and minor, but we're going to stick to the basics today. An easy way of looking at it is using this table. All these perfect intervals can either be decreased and turned into diminished intervals or increased and turned into augmented intervals. See how we have our major intervals? If we decrease it by a half step, it becomes a minor, but if we decrease it by another half step, this will become diminished. It is the same as if we have a major interval and we want to increase it by a half step, we get an augmented interval. These can be a little bit tricky to understand, but we're going to stick to the basics like I said. Another table that is super useful that I like to use is a table that counts to 12 like this. This table tells me all the different types of intervals and semitones that go along with them. Write this down and practice it, and it will help you remember all the important intervals. Hopefully this tutorial has helped you to understand how intervals work and will help you make music in a new way. Thanks for listening. Follow the Insta. Cheers.